Right, welcome back to the Motivational Jumpstart right here on WHUS Store. So, because we're pressed for time and because we have this legendary, incredible, remarkable guest in studio, we're going to jump right into it. I'm not going to go into his whole biography, his whole introduction, because we probably would be here for a few weeks, maybe a few months, maybe a few years, because it's so deep. But just for a little bit of the incredible individual we have here in studio. We have Dr. Jeffrey Ogbar, an individual who was born in Chicago and raised in L.A., California. Shout out to the West Coast for sure. He received his BA in history from Morehouse College. Shout out to the house in Atlanta, Georgia. He earned his MA and PhD in history, in U.S. history, and a minor in African studies from Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. Since 1997, he has taught at the University of Connecticut in the history department. He has done a lot of remarkable things. He's published. He's traveled the world. He probably is one of the most swagged out, well-dressed professors at the University of Connecticut. And I'm not saying that because I'm biased. I'm saying that because literally, once you see the playback, you don't see how dapper this incredible individual is. In studio, we have Dr. Jeffrey Ogbar. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing very well, sir. Very, very well. Thanks for that gracious introduction. I realize I should be listening to your show every morning. That motivation, that's what I need. I need that as I come to campus, get pumped up, for my day.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So, Dr. Ogbar, what we like to do on the Motivational Jumpstart, we always like to start off by having our guests just introduce a little bit about themselves and what makes you come alive, what inspires you.
I think a lot inspires me. There are a lot of things I enjoy in life. Family is very important. My love for music is manifested in my work, but also I do a lot of scholarly work, absolutely not attached to music. And I actually enjoy working with my students. It's something that I find great pleasure in. I think most professors will say the same thing, even though I may have lost some hairs with some students over the years. But I really enjoy that as well. So there's a lot out there. I mean, I'm also active as an athlete, so I run and that kind of stuff. And so half marathons mostly, but a couple marathons under my belt. And so those are some of the things I find pleasure in, man.
Absolutely. A couple of Tough Mudders, Iron Challenge. He does it all. Man, we talk about an athlete, we're talking about a Spartan in here for sure. So for sure. So Dr. Ogbar, take us just a little bit on your journey. It's been a remarkable one so far, but just you're from the West Coast. Well, you're born in Chi, grew up on the West Coast, and then how does, if you can even briefly summarize all that, how does Dr. Ogbar go from Chicago to LA and then to a tenured professor who is well published, well known in the world? How does that happen? So
I was born in Chicago. My parents are from Chicago. My father's side, they've been in Chicago for since probably the late 19th century, and then some of my father's side had come up in the first wave of the Great Migration from your home state, Louisiana, around the Baton Rouge area, and others had come earlier from Kentucky. My mom's side came up from Mississippi in the 1940s, and so my mother was the only one of 9 children not born in the South. And so Chicago kind of ran deep in my family in many ways, but my mother wanted to be an actress, decided to go to California. We actually lived in Compton. I finished my first grade in Compton, California, and then we moved to South Central LA, my second grade, and I lived in LA until high school, until I went to college. And so Los Angeles at the time was in the 1980s and early 1990s. So when I was in high school in the 1980s, it was very much like Boys in the Hood, Menace to Society, and it was a very different landscape than what LA is now. And before rap had provided a certain picture of some of the more crime-ridden, impoverished communities, I think a lot of people associate Los Angeles strictly with Hollywood and sort of sunshine, palm trees, beaches, and a very, very comfortable, laid-back life. Now, we hear people over the years say, LA is very laid-back, or California is very laid-back. And I didn't quite get that. I was like, I didn't really know. And so when Boys in the Hood first came out, that was gangster rap first, but a lot of people, I think, became more familiar with South Central LA in particular through Boys in the Hood and then subsequent movies than they did even through NWA's work or Ice Cube's work.
Right.
And a lot of people kind of understood that LA wasn't the sort of, what they had seen. This sort of caricature of this easy, comfortable life of, stars and celebrity. So, but Atlanta was great. I went to Atlanta, which was a very different city than anything I had seen before. It was a majority black city. The mayor, the chief of police, the fire department, most school teachers. It had the busiest airport in the world. It was run by black people, and so busier than De Gaulle, JFK, LaGuardia, O'Hare, LAX, and then run by African Americans. And so it was something to see, to go to Atlanta and then go to an HBCU,
Right.
go to Morehouse. It was a very different world for me, and it was really at Morehouse that provided me an exceptional space where almost anything was possible. And this idea that greatness was always something you should strive for. So your show resonates with the message I received for 4 years. And it would tell you, to paraphrase a rapper Razzcast, that mediocrity is your nemesis. And so this idea that you couldn't settle for a sort of standard, a sort of average, and you should push and strive for more. And there's a saying at Morehouse that above your head, Morehouse holds a crown that she inspires you to grow tall enough to wear. And so that was really the beginning of my interest in postgraduate study. I had a kind of an interest in it before I went to college, but it was a very loose idea, and I didn't know exactly what to do. So I started college. I went to go to law school. I don't know if you know that, but yeah. And then the idea of getting a PhD was much more attractive, and that's what happened. So pretty much for my sophomore year, I decided to do what I ended up doing up till now. So being an academic, and then my scholarly interests have, that's actually changed over the years. And so my first book is very different from my second book, and then the third book I'm working on now is very different. The 2 edited books are different. So so the subjects have varied considerably. So my intellectual interests have changed a bit.
Absolutely. So just for the listeners out there, where were your intellectual interests, at first, and kind of where has they evolved, just to present day?
So I think initially when I first went to graduate school, I went to do work on the Black Panther Party. And I was thinking of doing work on the Black Panther Party in Chicago, just doing a sort of dissertation on the Panther Party in Chicago. And it ended up being a book that over time, just to cut the story short, ended up being a study of black nationalism between a 20-year period from 1955 to 1975, and looking at 2 organizations as very important ideological, if you want to say, bookmarks, if you will. So the beginning of black power, black nationalism as a sort of major force in shaping mainstream African American politics in 1955, looking at the Nation of Islam, and then the evolution and various permutations of radical resistance that will culminate with the Black Panther Party, and then sort of, this is a fancy word, or I'll say decline, rather. I was going to say denouement, which is a GRE word. But so a sort of decline is 1975. And so that became this book, Black Power, really looking at the Black Power movement. And then my next project was, I had no training in hip-hop. I was a fan of hip-hop, like pretty much everyone I knew growing up, my close friends. And there were no courses on hip-hop. Very little scholarship started to emerge in maybe the late 1980s and into the I don't even know if, maybe a little bit in the late 1980s, but certainly in the early 1990s. And then I had this opportunity I was invited to write a prospectus for a book on hip-hop in around 2000. And that project came into fruition in 2007 with the book Hip Hop Revolution. But UConn has been instrumental in all this. And this probably wouldn't have happened had it not been for the University of Connecticut, where I was offered the opportunity to teach a class on anything for a first-year experience. And I taught a 1-credit class in the fall of 1998, my second year here, on hip-hop. It was a cool little class. And then the next academic year, I had to come up with a class I owed the university a class because I had a particular class that was canceled. And so they said, hey, you just teach whatever you want. Just come up with something and you can teach it. And I said, okay, well, I enjoyed that FYE class last year. Let me create a full 3-credit course on hip-hop. And it will be what we call a special topics course. And that class was the very first class. It was so rare that there was a university course on hip-hop that the Source magazine did a story on it. And they sent a photographer up to stores, and a journalist who was based in Atlanta interviewed me. And the article came out in September of 2000 about this UConn course on hip-hop. It was so rare. Fast forward 16 years later, hip-hop is taught all across the United States. Emory, Morehouse, Harvard has a hip-hop archive. There's a hip-hop center at Cornell, UCLA. So there's so many universities across the United States now that have courses on hip hop taught from so many different disciplines, and it's a really fascinating thing to see happen. But UConn has, as far as we know, the second oldest continuously taught course on hip hop in college.
Right. So to the listeners out there, and definitely to the hip hop fans, that's a major key. That's a major key alert that Dr. Ogbar was definitely a game changer and definitely a major influencer within that realm of teaching that hip hop course. So to the listeners out there, and I guess to kind of park it there, because I know a lot of the listeners tuning in wanted to know what is hip hop education. You know, I mean, I know it's a lot of your interest, and there's so many things that most people don't know. What are the 4 elements of hip hop? You know what I mean? And then what is hip hop education?
So the 4 elements of hip hop. So when we talk about hip hop, we're talking about a culture that emerged in the early 1970s in New York City in the Bronx, and emerged among primarily African American and Caribbean, primarily Puerto Rican young people, and there were some other Anglophone Caribbeans as well. The elements include DJing, which is scratching, mixing, backspinning, all that. The rapper or MCing. The B-boy or B-girl or breakdancer. And then the 4th element, which is the non-musical element, which was actually fused to the other 3 elements later, is a certain style of graffiti art. And so we have graffiti artists. So those are the 4 elements of hip-hop. In terms of hip-hop education, hip-hop has been used as a pedagogical tool throughout the United States in different capacities. And a pedagogical tool, pedagogy is a sort of a method of teaching, sort of an instructional method. And it's been used at secondary, primary school level, postgraduate, and it takes different forms depending on the discipline. And I can't speak that much in terms of hip hop pedagogy. I can as a professor, I can talk about how historians have engaged with philosophy scholars. So there's a book called Hip Hop and Philosophy. There's also a book called Philosophy and Hip Hop. And people often think that hip hop might be reduced to the sort of corporate images that we see on TV and here on the radio, which in our current day, mainstream commercial corporate hip hop is largely, besides low anomalies here and there. But when we think about Future, or we think about Migos, or you think about Rick Ross, or you think about Wayne, or you think about these really prominent rappers, for the most part, they have an anti-social message. And I would even argue an anti-black message, and clearly anti-woman. Like they universally call women B's and H's. They universally call black people N-words. But they also talk about, they celebrate all the guys I named. They also celebrate the joys of selling crack, right? And how wonderful it is, and how great it is to sell crack, kill ninjas, and do all these things to women, right? And so people will find hip hop to be, outside of a realm of critical engagement of society in any kind of cerebral way. Like people don't think of hip hop as being intellectual. They don't think of it as being sort of introspective or thoughtful. But hip hop actually from the late 70s to now, the bulk of it, in fact, I don't want to say the bulk of it, but large swaths of hip hop provide incredible opportunities for exploration of everything you think of, right? So we can look at religion and even rappers we don't think of as being particularly spiritual. You can take someone like Snoop Dogg, right? And even Rick Ross, who's super ignorant in many ways, like even Rick Ross will have inflections of spirituality and philosophical conversations in his music. And a lot of times their intention may not be to offer a dialogic, a sort of critical examination of karma or right and wrong and consequence to bad actions, but you will find that in their music.
Right,
and so,
right.
and we could find, in fact, a philosopher like Descartes, right? Or even Du Bois, and this notion of two-ness. And we could find that rappers have parallel conversations in their own art form. And then, hip-hop just provides spaces for even conversations around love and how, and different types of love. And love that, Greek philosophers talked about, agape or eros or, philippa or, all these different things. And so we find all these different forms of love, of spirituality, philosophical introspection, of commentary on mass incarceration and prison industrial complex. Actually, some of the earliest critiques of mass incarceration came out not of academics in the ivory tower, but actually from hip hop artists who talked about 3 strikes, policies, mandatory minimums, all sorts of things, and just again how deleterious they were and disruptive they were to communities of color in particular.
Right.
Those voices came out of early hip hop in the 1990s, long before. And we think about Black Lives Matter. We have those conversations coming out of hip hop in the early 1990s, years before. And the last thing I'll say about this is that if you look at in the 1980s, and I ask my students this, black musicians outside of hip hop, I'll say name some of the most famous black musicians and acts that came out of the 1980s. People say, Boys and Men, New Edition, Anita Baker, and you start naming all these folks, right? I'll say, now, how many of those people had songs that talked about what was going on in those communities at that time, the crises in those communities, right? Like, police brutality, think about the crack scourge, homicide rates, healthcare issues, poverty, unemployment, corruption, all these different things, right? Zero. Mm-hmm. However, hip hop, we have all sorts of artists. I mean, hip hop was they were the ones who were at the vanguard. They were the ones at the forefront. They were the ones who had the temerity and the irreverence to engage all those sorts of issues. It's conspicuous now that commercial hip hop artists, all the ones I just named, are for the most part silent on all those issues. But in fact, are in many ways anti-black, right? But you can hear, from Alicia Keys to Beyonce, and every TV show that we have now, from like majority black TV shows, Queen Sugar, Blackish, you name it, Greenleaf, they've all had episodes dealing with Black Lives Matter. They've talked about, Empire's talked about that, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's really kind of fascinating that hip hop has sort of taken this incredible turn away from these issues that made hip hop so relevant, I think, in this sort of expansion into pop culture 20 years ago, and so domination into pop culture 25 years ago or so.
Well, so looking at that, and I know in the essence of time we have about 7 or so minutes for you, but so in dissecting that, one critical part. So as a hip hop historian, and seeing the commercialization of hip hop and just how it's been portrayed and just the irony of so many of these well-paid or elitists within the hip-hop world could be considered anti-black, could be considered or are considered anti-black. So many of, I guess, millennials or people may not view them as that because obviously it's mainstream. But, when did that real, or would you credit that real turn to, right, just when we had a phenomenal balance in, and after 2004, it was done, or 2006. When would you say was that tipping point to where, commercialization, boom. This is not, when with Run DMC, the legend, when you talked to me, when he put up, the Adidas, and it was like, wow, that epic thing of Madison Square Garden or wherever he was, mm-hmm. or out of the country, but to now, what was that tipping part that so many millennials or just new generation have no idea, because this is literally the norm?
Yeah. So hip hop had and hip hop as origins was just straight up party music. So it wasn't about politics or anything. Throw your hands in the air, wave like you just don't care. You got on clean underwear, everybody say, oh yeah, oh, right? Yeah. So oh yeah, right? and so we hope everyone says, oh yeah. So you have this party music, and then by the late 1980s, hip hop started to take a form of sort of anti-establishmentarianism, meaning mm-hmm. that you had one group out of New York, Public Enemy, and you had one group out of the LA area, NWA. Both groups offered a sort of rebel, anti-establishment style, right? That was an urban, young, male, black, cool. And it was very attractive. When both of them talked about having adversarial relationships to the police and the state. But Public Enemy, when they talked about the police were tapping my phone, they were doing that because they were trying to be revolutionaries to free black people, right? Mm-hmm. So when NWA or Biggie would later talk about the police tapping their phone, it's because I'm selling crack. It wasn't because, or I'm killing ninjas. Like, you hear that in their songs, right? NWA famously says, I can't curse here, but like,
yeah.
Okay. F a car, I do a mother effing walk by, right? And so they're like celebrating drive-by shootings and killing black people, right? There's no mistake about it. So you have the NWA saying F the police, you have Public Enemy who would say fight the power, and then a pro-black group called X-Clan say F the police. But their adversarial relationships to the police and to the state are for very different reasons.
Absolutely.
One, a couch in the sort of black freedom fighter tradition of Nat Turner, the Black Panther Party, Malcolm X, and then the other sort of a gangster, I'm a thug, I'm a hoodlum, I'm a pimp, I'm a hustler, and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so you have these two contested anti-authoritarian styles. But what happened with hip hop provided no space for just party music any longer. So you had two artists that came out around the same time as these. You had MC Hammer and Vanilla Ice. Those two guys were just party rappers, right? They weren't talking about anything deep. They were just like, party, you can't touch this, Ice Ice Baby. And those two guys became sort of pariah, sort of jokes. Like when you say their name, like they laugh. Most people laugh. These were clowns. And so if you were to be taken seriously in hip hop, you really couldn't just come out and just be a party rapper. You couldn't just come out and say, you know, just throw your hands in the air like you just don't care. You couldn't just do that anymore. You had to have some sort of bad boy style. You had to have some sort of subversive, you know, element to you. And so you might come out of a tradition of Mos Def or to some extent Common did back in the day, or you take Dead Prez or some of these cats that came out that, you know, would talk about, or Killer Mike, right, where people would talk about, you know, injustice, police brutality. They'd be pro-black, they'd be militant, and then you have all these other cats that are just like straight up, like, you know, and then the misogyny became sort of par for the course. And the thing is that if you have two anti-authoritarian styles, it was only one style where the state came down on, right?
Absolutely.
And so what happened in around 1992, you have a deluge of lawsuits that came out. And the lawsuits weren't directed at people who were talking about killing ninjas. They were directed at people who said, you know, we're killing police officers, right? We're killing corrupt, racist police officers. It wasn't they were just killing any kind of police officers, but Public Enemy had a video called By the Time I Get to Arizona. The video was banned. Ice-T had a group, actually a rock group called Body Count. They had a song called Cop Killer, and they actually got dropped from the label. They were protesting around them. You had an artist named Paris. He was dropped because he talked about the same thing. And so you had all these people, and then Dr. Dre came off the Chronic. And when he finished the Chronic, he had a line in there where he said, "Officer, officer, I can't wait to see you in a coffin, sir." And Interscope came to him and said, "Come here, boy." And he ran. They said, "Boy, you check that out of there." And he said, "Okay, boss." He deleted it. And we're not going to have any of that cop killing stuff in here. He said, "Okay, boss." And he started itching and scratching. He said, "Well, what about all these lines where I talk about killing ninjas and slapping these B's and H's and running, you know, having multiple men having sex with these women that we degrade?" They're like, "Oh, I don't care about that. It's all good." So if you hear the Chronic, 1992, here's all that in there. They even have songs where there's a skit where they have a gun in a black man's mouth.
Right.
So that was all fine for Interscope. But again, so it became clear when Snoop came out the next year and said, "Rat-a-tat-tat, I never hesitate to put a ninja on his back," and he didn't say ninja.
Yeah.
That was okay, right? And people were like laughing and just, "Oh, this is great. I never hesitate to put a ninja on his back." But when you talk about, you know, doing drive-bys of police, or I'm the one with a 1 mile scope taking out, somebody's throat, and that became something that was intolerable. So it became a point that corporate hip hop made a very clear decision to promote certain types of bad boy anti-authoritarian styles over other types of bad boy anti-authoritarian styles. So MCs that got put on were like, "Hey, if I'm gonna become big, I'm gonna do anti-black music," and that's what we have now. And to just have pure party music is not impossible. But I think that in the case, I think that Drake does it, and Drake does it in a way that he still has some signs, he still calls them in Beast Nations. He still has some lines where he'll talk about, you know, he'll body some fools, like he'll get some of his boys and pay them to kill you and stuff. So he still has like some little, you know, and surprisingly, a lot of people are trip off of this, but Common and all of his discography, except for one album, I mean, he calls them in B's and H's all the time, except for Finding Forever. You know, he always calls them in B's and H's. And then he kills ninjas in a lot of his albums too, and people are surprised when it's like they don't really listen to his music because he's talking about killing ninjas too, and people are like, "Wow, you're a conscious rapper." He's like, "Well, I mean, I kill ninjas and I call women B's and H's too, just like, you know, Too Short."
Right,
but he also has a song. He'll have some songs about like love and, you know, affection, and, you know, he'll be out there with his videos with, you know, cards and talking about how much he loves a woman and stuff like that. So he also has that sensitive side. So Common is kind of all over the place, but for the most part, you don't find rappers that can come out. And there's been I'll say this last thing. No adult male rapper has gone platinum since the 1990s without calling women B's and H's on his album.
Wow.
That's amazing,
right?
Are less sexist than white men, less sexist than Latino guys, right? And so the thing is like that if African American men are more likely to endorse feminist values, why is it the music produced by some? It is not the way in R&B, it's not the way in jazz or gospel or, you know, other genres, but it is the way that we've seen hip hop in the last 25 years, you know. Right. And so it's very disturbing, but it's an inauthentic representation of African American culture, I would argue.
Wow. I know for the essence of time, because I know, like I stated at the beginning, he's a rock star professor in Haas class. But for the remaining, you know, minutes, you know, because we're definitely gonna have you back so we can really dissect this. So hopefully, even if it's a special broadcast, we're gonna dig deeper into it.
5 more minutes.
Oh, five more minutes. Okay.
That's okay.
Yeah, of course. So, you know, so just within that, where do you see, or what would it take for, I guess, for hip hop to reshape the establishment, or is it, over the last 25 years, the commercialization, the money has definitely gotten bigger? Like, where do you see, I guess, the trends going, or is the trends pretty much defined? It's commercialization. It's not, no one is going to really band together to try to shake the establishment, or is there some possible way that can happen?
Yeah. So I think that it's interesting that when you say this, and I've had this conversation for well over a decade, right? And I think that this is the first time that I've ever kind of reconsidered just the term commercialization. I think that commercialization isn't itself a bad thing. And this is the very first time. This is interesting saying this, Mike, but I think that, commercialization characterizes jazz, right? It characterized Marvin Gaye. I mean, Marvin Gaye was commercial.
Absolutely.
There's no way you get around that. Stevie Wonder. I love Stevie Wonder. And I love Prince, right? I love Michael Jackson. I love Anita Baker. I love Aretha Franklin. So there's a lot that has been commercial. But I think that there's a certain control over the artistic and creative spaces that we see in hip hop, and this sort of constriction that we don't see in other genres in the same way. So when we listen to all these other genres, like, people didn't insist that Marvin Gaye, call women B's and H's, that he just had to, Stevie Wonder must be, hostile to women. He must celebrate selling crack, or back then selling heroin, and how great it is to sell heroin, right? And so I think that we have that in hip hop, but I think that hip hop can exist. I mean, in the case of Drake or Kanye or J. Cole, you have or Kendrick, right? But it's interesting that Kendrick has not sold as much as Kendrick is celebrated as an MC. He has not sold as much as one would think. He's never had a number one hit, right? And which is crazy to think, right? That Kendrick Lamar is celebrated. He's not someone who is a classic sort of like ignorant, what people call coon rapper. And I think that one can be commercial and still downplay the anti-black styles. The problem is that when we think about who's going to buy the albums, we have the issue of certain appeals. So I really don't know. I don't have the easy answer for it. I think that the music is out there. People decide to promote certain things. Radios. I listen to XM radio all the time, and I imagine if you turn on XM radio right now, like Shade 405, there's some dude calling people ninjas, selling crack, or calling them B's and H's. All those things are going on. And you take someone like Macklemore as a white rapper. I mean, he's someone who's gone platinum without, he's a white guy, so he hasn't called people ninjas. But on his album, he had on the Heist, Schoolboy Q was a guest rapper. We call women B's and H's, but for the most part, that album went without employing the misogynistic tropes that we typically have. And I think that last thing, Kanye West, when he came out with Graduation, and I think it was 2007, it dropped the same day that 50 Cent dropped his album. That was a brilliant album. He barely called women B's and H's, and it would have gone platinum had he not. So I don't think it was essential for him to use misogynistic language, but I do think it's possible for people to do it without the joys of killing black people or denigrating women. So I think it's possible, and I think it's possible to be commercially successful at the same time. You follow me? Yeah. But it was really about a lot of that A&R. When you have ample evidence where you will see people being promoted and people not being promoted, and you can almost find like these ideological sort of like differences in this sort of artists out there. And there are actually a lot of artists out there. You go to YouTube, there's a cat named Napoleon the Legend, who's a new cat coming up, who is like very powerful, and he also offers very powerful critiques of commercial hip hop. And Killer Mike does that too. Of course. We have a lot of folks that have been around for a long time, and Immortal Technique is another one. But Immortal Technique, he has the same sort of gender issues that that are quite problematic. But he's someone also who's kind of anti-corporate control in many ways.
Right. For sure. So in conclusion, Dr. Ogbar, definitely appreciate you for coming to the studio. What's next for you? I would say the next book you're working on, what does that look like?
Yeah, I'm working on this book on Atlanta now, and it's going very slowly, but I have an advanced contract. It's actually, the manuscript is due to the press in the spring, so I'm going to be ducking and dodging the press come March and April. I won't be picking up the phone. I won't be responding to my emails because it's really not moving as swiftly as I had hoped. But the book, I'm actually going to Atlanta tomorrow, so I'll be doing some work on interviewing some people, and I hope this book is a when it comes out, I hope it does make a nice impact in the field. But so looking at the rise of municipal control in a certain sphere in Atlanta over the last 50 years.
Okay, cool. Well, Dr. Ogbar, I definitely appreciate you for coming in the studio, taking some time to rap with us. No point intended. And we're definitely gonna have you back in the studio. So for the Motivational Jumpstart, we're gonna take a quick break. We have another rock star guest in building, and we're just gonna keep with the motivation right here on the Motivational Jumpstart.